Welcome to the Regen Brands podcast. This is a place for brands, retailers, investors, and other food system stakeholders to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined by my co-host, AC, who's going to take us into the episode.
On this episode, we're joined by Brady Barnstable, co-founder and COO of Seven Sundays. Seven Sundays is a breakfast brand on a mission to restore human and planetary health, one cereal bowl at a time. Brady takes us back to the early days of muesli inspiration in New Zealand, which inspired he and his wife Hannah to leave fast-paced careers in New York City and bootstrap a new CPG brand. We get deep into the hard realities of sourcing regenerative and upcycled ingredients, the missing middle of processing infrastructure, and what it takes to scale a direct trade program at the farm level. Brady also shares how Seven Sundays has resisted the temptation to certify and shout, instead focusing on building long-term, meaningful grower relationships and systems-level impact. You'll hear why they're bullish on sunflowers, oats, and sorghum in the Midwest, how they're navigating club and conventional retail, and what their new Come Afield With Us campaign is doing to bring consumers along their regenerative journey. This episode is packed with candid insight, supply chain wisdom, and big picture optimism. Let's get into it. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. Very excited today to have our friend Brady from Seven Sundays joining us. So welcome, Brady.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for being here. And for those that regularly listen to the show, this is where Kyle is usually talking and asking the first question. He's not here with us today. But Brady, we'll ask you the same question that we ask folks who always are joining us. Just anyone who's not familiar with Seven Sundays, give us a little overview of the brand. What do you guys make and where can people find your products today?
Yeah, Seven Sundays is a cereal brand. We've been around for a while, actually since 2011 is when we got started. Originally made muesli exclusively for like the first 8 years of our business, which, we can get into the history of muesli at some point. But we pivoted in 2020 to other ancillary categories of the cereal aisle, but still very much a breakfast brand. We now make granolas, we make protein oats, we make sunflower cereals and oat cereals that are kind of reminiscent of your childhood favorites, only using pretty unique ingredients like upcycled oat protein and sunflower protein. And most recently, a sorghum crispy cereal that is made with like a flaked sorghum that we're really excited about. Kind of gives you that like snap, crackle, pop feeling from when you were a kid. Only it's like a single ingredient flake, so super clean ingredients. We only sweeten with the bees in the trees, so that's just sweetened with cocoa and date syrup and honey and things that come from nature. We're pretty adamant about the way that we flavor and the ingredients that we put in it, the level of sweetness. I think that's what we're most known for in the marketplace at the consumer level is really solid taste, ingredients you can trust, only real ingredients. And so that's kind of where we've made a name for ourselves in a category that is kind of known for the opposite of all of those things.
Yeah. No, that's great, man. And it's no surprise to me that given all of that, you guys have leaned into both regenerative ag and upcycled. Because I think they're kind of natural next steps when you are committed to the things that you just listed off.
Totally.
So excited to dive into all of that. I'm also excited to kind of nerd out on the cereal or breakfast category with you. I'm really interested to have you maybe dive more in depth into kind of the various products that are made by you all now and how you came to be there.
Sure.
But take us back in time. I believe from the website, this was inspired by a trip to New Zealand. Your wife and you fell in love with the muesli there, and then you all launched in 2011. Take us back to the original kind of foundation of the brand.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the website short version. You did your homework, and that definitely was a turning point in Hannah and I's lives and career paths. Hannah's
Mhm.
my life partner and business partner. She's CEO and founder. I'm COO and co-founder of the brand. Um, and yes, we did first have muesli when we were on our honeymoon in New Zealand. We were both working really fast-paced, intense jobs in New York City. She was
Mhm.
in finance, I was in environmental consulting. Um, Not where I really expected to end up, in kind of this really fast-paced, breakneck environment where tight timelines didn't really feel like you were kind of adding a lot of value in the world.
Mhm.
Didn't feel like, it was aligned with my passion or hers.
Mhm.
So we took this break in New Zealand. It was a super inspirational place. It was you felt very connected to both nature and the food that you were eating, the people that you met. Everything just felt very real, felt very connected. And I actually grew up, surrounded by farmland. In
Mhm.
central Illinois, very rural upbringing. Um, I and I didn't feel that there, which is interesting to me. Like it's like where most of the farmland is, and
Yeah.
even though a lot of like summer jobs were spent like baling hay, and you're kind of like you know surrounded by cornfields. My grandparents had a farm that we would visit very regularly, so I was there, I was present in that environment, but I was never super drawn to it. I was never passionate about it, and I never felt very connected to it.
Mhm.
So, it took it, and I even went to school at the University of Illinois
Yeah.
in the agricultural space. It was ancillary. They kept it very separate, which is also interesting to me. But it was like the agricultural college, and I was in the natural resources, environmental science space.
Mhm.
Um, because so as I grew older, I was that's sort of where I found I was, sort of most interested in that kind of biological science space. Like understanding the natural world was what was really kind of, you know, driving me. And so, interesting that like it took this trip to New Zealand for me and Hannah, to really feel connected to the food and
Right.
this breakfast that we were eating every day, which was muesli,
Yeah.
this really super unprocessed whole ingredient, dried fruits, nuts, seeds, like taste delicious. Like, how have you never heard of this? Um, Come back to and it also like gave us kind of the space and time that we hadn't really taken. It was like a 6 week stint between December or early December through like early January,
Mhm.
their summertime in New Zealand. And it took that like space and time away from our jobs to realize like, okay, we need to make a change here.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it was just about like wanting to make a difference. We just sort of felt the need to do something different and do something that felt like we were making a difference. And it wasn't necessarily in that moment like, oh, we're going to start a muesli company. that that part like was a slower rollout. We're like, we came back, started
Yeah.
our lives, but we were still back in New York. Where do we want to live? Where do we want to raise a family? And what kind of business do we want to start? But it kind of, for Hannah, it kept coming back to food because she had this really in this her passion and what really drives her is around the food system in America is really messed up. The way we make food, the way we grow food, how disconnected it all is,
Yeah.
um, how it's making us all sick. All of these things kind of really make her like drive her.
Mhm.
And then of course I come at it from like the planet health standpoint. And the unique thing about the food space is like we're uniquely positioned to tackle both the people
Right.
health and planet health problem kind of all in one. And that's sort of you know, where we have this like intersection. And that's where now the mission of Seven Sundays and the brand has kind of evolved past like just wanting to bring muesli to the US in a bigger way into
Yeah.
this like, how do we change the cereal aisle? How do we change the food system as a whole to restore people and planet health?
Yeah, and I think it's hard probably for most people listening to this to think back to 2011 and the state of the cereal aisle at that point, which in most conventional grocery stores, it still has a long ways to go. But
Mhm.
even in the natural channel, I'm sure, and I can kind of remember the amount of options was still severely limited. I mean, you would know better than I, and I'd love for you to speak to that. What was that what was that journey like of figuring out, okay, like, we want to live here, we want to be in this type of business, we think it's food, we're inspired by the New Zealand muesli, to like, okay, there's an actual category opportunity here to like start a brand with this type of a product in this industry.
Yeah, if I were to think back, where our heads were at in those early years, it was really all about, you know, muesli, a product.
Yeah.
Like kind of we saw an opportunity in that category. We saw what was happening with, healthier granola.
Mhm.
Um, even like the Greek yogurt craze was happening at the time. And there was a sense, or we had a sense, that muesli being, kind of a lower sugar, less processed version of granola was really about to take off.
Mhm.
And so we were kind of, leaning into that product as like our entry point into the cereal aisle. And to some extent, that did happen. It just didn't, it wasn't happening fast enough it didn't happen overnight. It's still happening. Like we still have our four original muesli recipes. Actually, I think we swapped one and we're gluten free now. We didn't start as gluten free.
Mhm.
So there's been some adjustments that have been made, but we're still seeing, you know, 10 to 15% growth on those muesli product lines today.
Wow. Wow.
It's just, it just wasn't enough to like support the bigger mission that we had to change the cereal aisle, because we were still
Mhm.
getting positioned on the, the bottom shelf, with, the Alpens, the Swiss Familias, the
Mhm.
Bob's Red Mill, muesli, which is what basically the category that's really all that exists today even. There's been some people that have kind of come in and out of that muesli space, but
Yeah.
we always like to say we were the tallest midget of the, the muesli um,
Well,
category, which was pretty small.
that's interesting to me because when I look at the product portfolio today, and I wrote down, and you listed off oats, granola, cereals, muesli, and then the little crispies. I think you would put that in cereals, but to me, it was like
Yeah,
almost like a separate thing.
yeah,
And as just a guy who grew up in the American Midwest, just like you, it's like when I think about those products, I kind of know exactly what I do with all of them besides muesli. So like
yeah,
there's the least familiarity for the average American consumer there, I would assume.
100%.
Um,
Yep.
but there is also this could just be my bias, but like they're all so similar. There's like not that much difference between them, but then I'm sure you also have your consumers where it's like, okay, oats, I'm like making oatmeal with hot water and I'm eating them like this.
Mhm.
Cereal, I'm obviously like putting it with milk and I'm eating it like that. How do you guys think about that when you like think about how you develop products or market products like in that category overall?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that awareness piece, that, what do I do with this product, like, once it's in my pantry?
Yeah.
Our theory was that, like, this muesli product, even though there was that, you know, less familiarity to it, and less awareness around it, it was still, the best cereal that you could eat and put in your body that's gonna like leave you feeling full. It tastes, if you do prepare it the right way, it tastes delicious. Um, and then we were also establishing our brand, and we were learning the ropes of the food supply chain and unwinding the supply chain to have more transparency. And muesli was a great product for us looking back to get started with, because we didn't have food industry experience.
Yeah.
Coming in, I mean, an environmental consultant and a finance person, like, I mean, they play a role now, but like starting a food brand, like we had no idea what we were doing. And there's a lot of things we still don't know. But it was like this MBA of like, how do you start a food brand, and stepping in like every pitfall that you could possibly imagine along the way, those first 8 years. And starting a family, we have 3 kids at home and all these things.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, to, back to your point of like the lack of awareness, we realized, in order to really make change in the cereal aisle and the food system at large, like we need to meet our consumers where they're at with products that still have the same clean ingredients, same value proposition that we brought with the muesli, but let's bring it in a format that they don't have to think about it. It's just either
Yeah.
grabbing it right out of the bag and
Yeah.
eating it like a
Mhm.
granola or a cereal, or just I'm going to pour milk on it and go. Like there's zero thought. And that was sort of a shift that probably took us a little, like we were pretty stubborn in those early days too. Like, we're going to keep pushing. Um, but at a certain point, like there was a tipping point where we were like, we need to pivot here. And it's about the brand and growing the brand trust over time, not about a specific product per se. So that's when we felt we had the customer loyalty. We had sort of built these early adopters who really cared about these things. We had a mission behind our brand. We had retailer relationships and farmer relationships. Like, let's just bring those pieces together, all those learnings from those first 8 years, and um, let's meet the consumer where they're at, with, hit them with something that tastes like a Cocoa Puff, and, has the familiarity of that, but we're going to make it with totally different ingredients.
All right, team. Quick interruption to let you know that we are extremely close to our goal of $25,000 for this very first fundraising campaign. We're so close, y'all. We only have a couple weeks left. So, to those of you that have donated and participated, thank you very much. To those of you that have not, we would greatly appreciate you considering and making it a donation. There are some pretty cool, fun perks. All right. Any donation over $10, that's our minimum donation amount. You'll be included in our community call, which is happening in a number of days since this episode comes out. So make sure you go donate quickly so we can get you invited to that celebration. If you can make a recurring monthly donation of at least $25, you'll be entered to win a regenerative product prize pack valued at over $1,000. Okay, that's a pretty epic deal. All right. And then if you make a one-time donation over $100, you'll be entered for a chance to win a Force of Nature Grill Master box, which is a over $300 value of regenerative meat coming your way if you are selected as the winner. So if you can, if you value what we do, we would greatly appreciate your financial support. You can visit donate.regen-brands.com/podcast to make a donation. That's donate.regen-brands.com/podcast to make a donation. Thanks so much. I think that's like the best Trojan horse for sustainability, regeneration, all these things we're trying to accomplish is making products that are very familiar to the consumer, where they don't feel like they're trading off whatever that typical experience is, but it's has a way better LOI, it has way better nutrition, has a way better sustainability portfolio. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that, and we've seen that across a lot of the brands we've kind of studied or talked to on the show. Um, you mentioned the supply chain. I would love to talk about that, and maybe that'll lead us to kind of the agricultural piece. Sounds like there were some major hurdles there up front, which is not shocking.
Mhm.
Was it really hard to just find the right ingredients? Was it really hard to find the right co-mans? I mean, you guys are doing direct trade now. Like, just unpack some of the supply chain complexity at the beginning and kind of where some of those things are at now, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Have to take a deep breath and make sure
Yeah,
I don't.
I know that's a loaded one, and so we got plenty of time, and I'll help you along the way.
Yeah, no, I don't want to turn it into a therapy session, and it's easy to go down that road,
Yeah,
when you start digging in. Um, I mean, it was important to us. It was important enough to us as founders and as a brand that like the very first supplier we worked with um, was whole grain milling. They were an organic small grain pioneer, um, from back in the early '90s. We were introduced to their product through the Minneapolis has a really awesome
yeah,
natural food co-op scene. So if you go into the bulk bins in uh, in any of the co-ops, which Hannah like lives in pretty much every day. If she's not at the office or at home, she's at Lakewinds
Yeah.
Co-op if anybody wants to find her. She that's where we found whole grain milling. They were our original supplier of oats, rye, and barley, kind of to those original recipes. And he had what was unique about him, and what I think still really resonates with me today, is he has on-farm processing. So he had this unique ability where we could go direct. We were essentially doing direct trade right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And we then we outgrew his oats, rye, and barley supply probably in year two. We were kind of moving out of the friend's restaurant kitchen into co-packers, starting to pick up, regional chains like Lunds and Byerly's. Target even came to us early on and did a test. So we're starting to scale, and that's when it really got challenging, because I think direct trade works, and just sort of transparency in general, which is needed for all of this regenerative work, is early easier in the early days,
Yeah.
and then I think there's also a point at which it becomes a little bit easier once you have scaled, but there's this in between time where you're ordering a few pallets here and there, where it's tricky, because you're typically having to go through like a distributor or broker, and then you're like another step or two removed from the source, right? So
Right.
um, it was a pretty um, long learning process, on how to unwind that. And one of the bigger challenges that I kind of hinted at, or with Doug's on-farm processing, is you have to that intermediary step, like that middle tier milling, like cleaning, deholing, milling, that's a big barrier, and it needs to be established really before you can do your direct sourcing, for it to be successful for the grower and for us, right? Because we can't just put. I mean, I'm sure you've had many of these conversations on this podcast already, but that was a thing that we quickly realized, was missing in order to do the things that we needed to do, and that we wanted to move our mission forward. And so, those kind of learnings, if you fast forward to present day, we're really trying to build our direct trade program at scale around specific processors. And the same thing applies to things like upcycling, and anywhere you have a unique ingredient where you're trying to do things differently outside of that, like, really refined, uh, efficient model that the food system has built, or that
Yeah.
big food and ag have built. If you step outside of that, like, you basically have to build it yourself, which is really hard, time consuming, expensive, challenging, all the things. But also, it's what consumers want. It's what moves our mission forward. That whole, movement outside of the path that's been, clearly paved. Um, it still exists. It's just everything's just on a larger scale now. And it is tricky in those kind of middle, that and we have this issue, like, with ingredients that we still use small amounts of. But we have a team now, like a supply chain team, like Emily, who who
Yeah.
has like at least, established direct to processor relationships. That doesn't always, like with things like vanilla and cocoa, things that we're sourcing outside of the country. It's more difficult to find that transparency all the way down to the growing level.
Right.
But at least there's not, three steps along the way. There's only,
Right.
there's and then from there, it's, kind of just getting the right, supplier policies and code of conduct in place, and that trust that you establish with these processors, that they're doing things the right way in their supply chain.
Yeah. I mean, for everything you're sourcing domestically, for the most part, there's nothing that you need to purchase that I can see that like you don't need some sort of processing element, right? So it's your direct trade's really going to have to be with some sort of aggregator processor that can actually get you the finished good that goes into the package.
Mhm.
Um, and you can tell us however many ingredients you have now if you know the exact number, but it's a lot, and you have all these multi-ingredient SKUs to where you're really managing a lot if you're trying to do direct trade, I
Mhm.
would assume. So yeah, I
And
can
then
only imagine the complexity.
yeah, and then not to keep going on the challenges, but like it's I think one thing that doesn't really get brought up or talked about enough is the
Yeah.
disconnect in the food, like the food safety world, like the the FDA compliance, the SQF standards that we have to maintain as a brand and at the food manufacturing facility, the food safety elements.
Yeah.
Anytime like that whole system is immensely challenging to break into from a direct trade or farm level standpoint. Um, and it's almost like we don't we're always challenging the teams. We have um, in-house, so we source all of our ingredients, we buy all of our ingredients. We have our own quality team in-house to help kind of bridge that gap. But we do work with external manufacturing partners, so they have their own, food safety teams and quality teams, and their own culture on sort of on how risk averse or conservative their approach to food safety is. But trying to like bridge that gap and sort of meet each manufacturing facility's quality requirements. Now you add in like, farm level ingredients or on farm processing, or upcycled ingredients. Those products tend to be in the growers and the partners that we work with. They don't have the resources necessarily in house to meet and all the
Right.
all the
The
paperwork,
paperwork, the
all the quality
costs,
documents.
the right, the admin.
Yeah, all of the stuff that we have or that our manufacturing partners have. So it's like then we have to step in, and we've done this on a lot of our upcycled ingredients. Like we step in and bring a food safety consultant to the plant and say these we kind of handhold them through this process of like getting up to food safety standards so that those ingredients can be accepted into the plant. That's like an ongoing everyday conversation internally between us, our manufacturing partners. The consistency challenges too, like with upcycled ingredients in particular, but even regenerative and direct trade, like anytime you're kind of outside of that, again, like that well-worn path or that like, really highly refined system, you're going to have inconsistencies from year to year in, you know, weather
Yeah.
conditions, drought, all of the things which changes the ingredient. So like there's almost like I'm 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 not quite there yet, like with educating consumers, but
Right.
certainly having conversations with retailers around, hey, why is your product out of stock? And it's like, well, we had some issues with our upcycled supply chain because it's brand new. Like
Yeah.
nobody's ever used this ingredient before.
Right.
Um, so it's
And if
immensely
it's
challenging. Yeah.
right, and if
I,
it's an annual crop cycle and it's single origin and its identity preserved, it's like there might not be redundancy of supply. Like there might not be anywhere else to go. Like,
yeah. Yeah. Emily always hates it when I say we don't have a plan B, but in some cases we don't. We don't yet, like we're working on it. Like we
yeah.
can piece together things to like keep products in supply, but uh, they are unique, they're bespoke, they're with great farming or processing partners that we're supporting along the way to make it happen. But um, and it is way harder than doing things like the traditional way, I guess is the main summary. It was pretty easy in the early days, easier. It was very hard in the middle, and now it's like we've figured some things out. We've figured out a model that we think works. That's kind of like building our supply chains around the processor first. Like that's kind of been the key, um, like bridge, I guess. And then supporting that processor with anything that they need. Like let's build around this because that's sort of the key missing piece. And I think unlocking, more acres and more
Yeah.
more growing partners along the regenerative supply chain.
Yeah, there's definitely some key themes that we've seen time and time again there of, the middle infrastructure not being there. The food safety is a piece that we've talked about a little bit, but I like the added detail that you kind of brought to that conversation. I think it's often forgotten and not talked about enough. And
Mhm.
then the whole business brand phase of like phase one, direct trade and like this specific sourcing is easy, maybe not easy to get the margin profile right all the time, but it's like easy to figure out operationally. And
Yep.
then it gets easier in like phase three where you have some supply and it's really easy to maybe take all the supply from a source or a processor or a farmer. But that middle kind of phase two or whatever we want to call it with whatever associated revenue number, it's very challenging as you're really trying to grow and scale, to add that level of complexity. And maybe you have the volume for this, but you don't have the volume for that. So
Mhm.
that's that's super interesting. And I think something we've clearly seen as a pattern. Um,
I would say more than a revenue target, like that phase 3 maybe starts when you can hit kind of um, truckload
yeah.
volumes on things.
Yeah.
That
Of
seems to be
ingredient purchases.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. The I wanna talk about the regenerative piece.
Mhm.
I think you guys have a unique approach. Like, you don't have a certification on any packaging. You're not really talking about regenerative a lot on the consumer marketing side. You guys don't really have a SKU specific strategy from what I understand from talking to Emily and a couple other people on your team. But you are doing a lot of work with the growers themselves and you're deeply committed. You're doing a lot of work with SCI. Like just high level, what does regenerative mean to Seven Sundays and how would you articulate the strategy at a high level? And then we can come back for some of those more detailed kind of sub bullets.
Yeah. Um, you're right in all those things. Spot on. Again, great job with the homework. I can tell you've been talking to Emily.
Yeah, she
I would
prepped me
say,
well. Shout out Emily.
yeah, I wasn't. I would, yeah, I would say that we don't consider ourselves. I mean, here we are on the Regen Brands podcast. So, but we tend to be, pretty hesitant to talk too loudly. Some of that is just sort of like who Hannah and I are.
Good
As
Midwestern humility, I can tell, Brady.
exactly.
It's fine.
Well, you grew up in Indiana, you know how it is. Um, there's folks that are, pushing us to talk more about it, but I wouldn't say we're regenerative yet. I like to talk about it more in sort of high level, like looking out into the future, like as our mission on moves forward, how do we reach, or how do we shoot for regeneration of or restoration of a food system, and um, I can dig more into that in a minute, but
Yeah.
as it pertains to the certifications and the products, we have 85 different ingredients across
Right.
now all of our cereal products.
Mhm.
Even our simplest, like our crispies that just launched have six or seven ingredients.
Yeah.
Um, it would be really difficult to go after like a SKU specific certification for us.
Mhm.
And I don't think the consumer is loo- looking for that, at least from us right now.
Yeah.
I think there's so much to tackle in the broader cereal aisle, in the broader food
Yeah.
system, in terms of like, how we grow, how we process, how we use our resources, all the way to like how we package our cereal. I consider that all part of how we define regeneration because it's
Yes.
a system wide thing. I think so that's how we try to approach it, and internally that's how we talk about it. Externally, it's a really complex conversation to have with consumers who have like 2 minutes or less than that, 30 seconds when they're making a decision in the cereal aisle.
Yeah.
So what we want people to see from in that this world of regenerative and sustainable and climate friendly, however you want to define it. And
Mhm.
I'm also looking at the back of our Krispies. We have like 6 or 7 other certifications on there already. We're non-GMO verified, we're B Corp certified, we're gluten-free certified, 100% whole grain, all these other things, right? So it's
Mhm.
like adding another certification to what's already probably pretty complex to the consumer to understand that in the 30 seconds they're making a decision in the cereal aisle. I think
Mhm.
what we would like to do, and again, for us, we've been doing this for a long time. So it's like like we're looking out, 5 years, 10 years, like on this like seemingly impossible mission of restoring, you know, people and planet health. We just want people to see or have the feeling that we are doing things totally differently in the cereal aisle. And that means, we're working with farmers differently. We're working with farmers who have different practices, some regenerative practices. Some of our farmers are like, leading edge regenerative farmers, and
Yeah.
then others are like brand new to it. And we want to have flexibility to kind of shift consumers or bring more and more consumers along on that journey. And I don't see a rock certification or regener or even FCI, who we work with really closely um, within our farming network. We don't see a need for the SCI verification at this point. We just want to have a way of we're working with SCI on. They have really awesome farm level support through like Liz Haney and her team. Taylor Heron has a really great network of growers that she brings to the table to us all the time.
Mhm.
We're using them to verify and track the acres that are regenerative in our supply chain, and that way we have like a clearer path on what we're doing
Yeah.
and how we're building this over time. But from a consumer standpoint, I think the story is just for us, because of our product type and because of where we sit in the cereal aisle, it's not something that we're really pushing to achieve a certification on our pack right now,
Yeah.
if that
And I
makes
think
sense.
that no, it makes complete sense and it's super fair. And like we're the biggest cheerleaders in the world for like, hey, let's make as much SKU specific regenerative claims and really increase the awareness of that and increase the value of these certifications. But as you've referenced a couple of times, like if you really look and you step back at the macro, we're so early. Like, and all the data actually shows like the consumer still doesn't know what this word is. They don't really recognize the certifications. Like, look how long it's taken USDA organic to get consumer awareness and even understanding at a basic level of, and regenerative's more complicated than that. So totally
Yeah.
makes sense. And something that Kyle and I've talked about recently on a couple of the podcasts with the Maha movement is if you look at the Maslow hierarchy of needs in Maha, regenerative's at the very tippy top, right? At
Mhm.
the bottom is no artificial flavors, no dyes, less harmful ingredients. And like, if I look at your site and I look at your packaging, like that's what you guys are really leading with, which is the primary need and the primary purchasing driver with the consumer.
Mhm.
Um, and so, from our perspective as an advocacy organization, right? If it's still leading to net more regenerative acreage and net more support of regenerative supply, like, hey, great. Like, I
Yep.
don't care if that demand comes from a explicit awareness for the consumer has or a no awareness, as
Yep.
long as the demand is increasing. So for us it's a both and I think it makes sense from how you've articulated it for y'all.
Yeah.
um
I
Brady,
think
share. Go
I
ahead.
think too that we, we also need those like top of the pyramid
Right.
brands that are, really pushing the envelope forward and kind of going for, rock certification with, things like chocolate bars and oatmeal and things. I think that helps with the awareness piece too. So like it's all part of like moving the needle in the right direction. For us, we're just like we're taking a long-term approach, and it's a longer journey. And I also would add that like the retailers are really listening and they really care. So like we did a farm visit last fall to one of our regenerative farms with Whole Foods, and um, their grocery team essentially flew in from Austin,
Mhm.
Texas to Austin, Minnesota to visit our sunflower farm. And, even as big as like, Target and Costco, like they're inviting us in to have these manager meetings, or not just the usual, like during the buying cycle, they're bringing in brands to like review products. They want to understand what we're doing within our supply chains, um, around regenerative practices. And we hope that that additional interest from them is, you know, hopefully, prioritizing our products and brand when it comes to things like shelf space or off shelves or,
Right.
um, you know, shelf tags, anything that can kind of help us sort of stand out and educate the consumer in a bigger way. So like we're kind of, you know, a roundabout way through the to the consumer, but the fact that the retailer who's super connected with the consumer even more so than we are in some respects, like the fact that they're interested is really encouraging to me. And that seems to have really ratcheted up in the last year or two. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it does seem like that overall interest is growing from a lot of the leading folks. Like it's such a mixed bag how it's actually turning into the real business economics of working with those retailers that I think it's hard to assess like in a monolith. And you hear like really great, promising things from certain brands, and you hear like not great, very disappointing things from certain brands. So we are like asking ourselves actually like how we can do a better job kind of tracking, reporting, and being informed on that. But it's so much of a black box on the retail side, and it's also so individualized based on the brand and maybe the relationship with the category manager or whatever. So kind
Yep.
of kind of an aside there, but agree that's what we're seeing overall. And there's positive momentum. I think that is the biggest like takeaway is like there's definitely interest, there's increasing awareness and understanding, and there is support, whether it's to the degree and like gonna really solve the fundamental problems remains to be seen. Um, I wanna I wanna double back to just a couple of things, Brady, just to have you highlight.
Yep.
Um, for the regenerative stuff and some of the tracking and some of like the maybe practice implementation that you're working on with SCI, are there specific ingredients or regions that's been most easiest or where you're really focused on? And then how do you all think about like organic versus non-organic when it comes to like sustainability and sourcing and all the things?
Okay. Yeah, I'll start with the first one. I think, inherently, our products are set up really well um, for grow to work with growers and add diversity to their
Right,
rotations and provide markets for those diverse crops. Like
right.
that was one of the things that was apparent early on, especially even, when we were just a muesli business. Like when we would
Hmm.
talk to growers and learn from them, it was like, I really want to grow more buckwheat. And understanding, why an organic farmer would want to grow more buckwheat. It
Hmm.
helps his soil health and, the pollinator aspect of it. And the same applies to, um, sorghum that we're working with now, which is also like a really awesome cover crop or diverse crop rotation, super climate friendly, drought resistant, all these things.
Yep.
So we're already kind of we're 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 providing markets for, um, really diverse ingredients within our supply chain. Um, so, your question was about originally? I lost my train of thought there. It was about regenerative.
Yeah, focus on ingredients and specific regions, and you were talking about how it naturally lends
Oh, right.
itself to
The re-
really backing up
yes,
crop rotations.
yeah. So that's what was going to lead me to sunflowers and sort of where we're at today
Mm.
with sunflowers in the upper Midwest. We have focused on sunflowers for a few different reasons. the diversity aspect, which I already mentioned, I think there's a lot of really good and strong interest from farmers in wanting to add alternative crops to their system, whether it's from a regenerative standpoint or just not wanting to grow commodity ingredients like corn and soybeans for market conditions, or they've seen a neighbor growing it, or whatever their driver is. There's interest out there, and I'm sure you've heard that from a lot of folks. Like there's no shortage of growers that want to do things differently and grow different crops, and we can provide markets for that, which is great. But you have to have processing. So when we developed our sunflower cereal back in like 2020, we worked with a sunflower processor that we had known from, ironically, Expo West in sort of the years, even though they were somewhat local to us. Like we see them in California. We're part of the same Minnesota Department of Ag network. And so when we innovate, we tend to reach out to that network. And they had developed this sunflower protein product that was really interesting to us because it was, early on in that like upcycled conversation. And that was sort of starting to gain momentum. And this was an ingredient that was, basically historically either being, wasted or sent out for animal feed. And they were starting to repurpose it as a food grade ingredient. And so I bring that up because I think it's really important to bring the processor. We had learned that over the years, bringing the processor to the table first, and then establishing a network of growers within like a reasonable distance, to that processor is pretty critical, over the long term. And then you layer on the fact that sunflowers grow great in the upper Midwest. It's primarily the Dakotas, but that I think we've shown now, that we can grow them really well here in Minnesota as well. And they're just a really awesome, rotational crop. So that was like that's, I think, been our most successful, regional direct trade model that we've built over the last few years. I think this year we're sourcing 2,000 plus acres of sunflowers in Minnesota, kind of around this processor, which is really exciting. And then, we're excited to do the same thing around sorghum. I think that's a really good upper Midwest kind of Great Plains crop that grows really well. And farmers are who are in that regenerative sphere that we have met through SCI or other, other brands in our network. There's a lot of interest in growing sorghum. So like we know that when we're ready with the processing side, like we're going to have a really awesome network of growers that we can tap into. And then the other one I would say that, buckwheat I've mentioned is also, a great regenerative ingredient that farmers want to grow, or we actually still work with whole grain milling, who originally provided us oats, rye, and barley. We still use them for our buckwheat, which grows really well here. And then the last one I would mention is, oats, I think, are a huge unlock for growers because there's a lot of familiarity with it, probably, a generation removed, I would say, from, they know of it. They know how to grow it. The equipment that they need to grow it is either already on farm or, a neighbor has it. They just need a market for it, a consistent market for it, the right price. And Practical Farmers of Iowa, who we've partnered with on some pilot projects in the past around oats, do a great job of like bringing all those growers together in a network and providing cost sharing and doing all these incentive programs to get growers to bring more oats into the corn belt. And so the missing piece to the oats equation and for a lot of these ingredients is processing. And we're really excited that there's an oat mill coming into southern Minnesota that will help unlock some of those regional oat the oat mafia is like just waiting, just waiting.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of pent up demand. It's just a matter of like competing with corn and soybean pricing and like all these,
Yeah.
barriers that the farmer has to like getting over the hump and like, yeah, I'll grow oats. But like there's been enough studies now that have shown, if you are focused on not necessarily just yields, but profitability, like adding oats into your rotation is a game changer. And can be a positive if we have local processing, if we have good consistent pricing, and some of those things are being solved, which I'm really excited about because there's I think we use a lot of oats, a lot of oat byproduct or oat protein that's coming out of the oat milk industry. Like we're reusing that, so we're not sourcing it directly from farmers
Yeah.
necessarily, but like um, growing oats in the Midwest, processing in the Midwest, and then using all that byproduct from the oat milk industry in the Midwest is, to me, like when I think about that, like it's like, oh, that's regeneration all the way through, because you have it at the farm level, and then you have it at the processing level because the processor is repurposing that product, and then you're putting it into a healthier cereal, instead of you know using all those resources to grow oats,
Yeah.
from literally from the ground up. You're just taking the nutrient rich leftovers from oat milk and making cereal out of it, and then like let's put some oat milk on it,
Mhm.
and then you've got this like beautiful full circle regeneration
Mhm.
cereal. Like that's the stuff that gets me really excited, is when you can kind of like system wide,
Yeah.
start to finish, local, regenerative, and healthy to the consumer.
Yeah, and I think it's not an accident that you brought up like the fact that y'all live in Minnesota, and the most you said like the most successful direct trade partnership is actually something that's in your backyard or in your region, and then you mentioned a couple other very close places, whether that be other places in Minnesota or Iowa. I have a very strong, I feel like, hypothesis that's backed up with really good correlation, maybe not confirmed causation, that the closer the team or the founders are to the sources that they're actually trying to work with, like
Yeah.
it seems like it becomes easier for them to pull off, whether it be direct trade or just a more regenerative supply chain.
Yeah.
What percentage, or how much importance would you assign to the fact that you guys are there close to the source?
I mean, I think it's a huge advantage that we have, and opportunity that we have, being kind of in the breadbasket,
Yeah.
of America right here. And this is why, you know, General Mills is here, and Kellogg's was here, and Post was here. Everybody, like all the big cereal brands, have established themselves, around here for the same reason. And that was sort of back when, you know, the mills were along the Mississippi River, and there was, a lot of processing. And in some ways, we're kind of going back to that, and or we're trying to.
Yeah.
We're kind of trying to, um, you know, reinvent that in a modern way, right?
Mhm.
And but that, the way things were done, kind of locally and regionally, um, it I think it works really, or it could work really well in the Midwest. And so we're really lucky to be here. We have some great resources through the Minnesota Department of Ag who support these things. There's some really great growers and processors and nonprofit organizations that we've worked with over
Yeah.
the years that have educated us and brought everybody to the table. Um, yeah, so everything's here. Like it's such a huge opportunity for us as a cereal brand, particularly, to take advantage of all those resources, um, the great soil that we have here in the Midwest, and truly make a change in the food system.
Yeah. Love it. Um, I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about channel mix and maybe how you guys have managed that over the years and where you think that's going. I mean, I see you all at a lot of the key natural retailers. I see you in club now. I see, you're talking about Target. So you seem to have, you know, some good channel diversity. Where did that start? Where has it gone? And where do you see that going? And how does that relate to this work that you're trying to do, building, better supply chains and impacting agriculture in a positive way?
Yeah. I'll start with club because
Yeah.
that was a real game changer for us for a lot of reasons.
Unlocking those truckloads, I'm sure that was a big
Yeah,
part of it.
the 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 scale is one thing.
Yeah.
We already covered that as an unlock. The like the way that they're like particularly Costco for us, the way that they're like we're drawn to Hannah and I as founders, both like when it comes to building teams, like who we partner with with our co-manufacturers, who we partner with in our supply chain and our retailers, we're drawn to um, people who have kind of chosen a different path or done things
Yeah.
differently, because that's sort of
Yeah.
how we started, right? So like there's like this magnet effect, and same with
Yeah.
other founders, right? Like we're
Mhm.
really good friends with Christy at Quinn, and and then there's a local brand here, ENC's Snacks, who was early into Costco with Heavenly Hunks. You've maybe seen Heavenly Hunks.
Yeah. I've had them before. Yeah.
Yeah, they invited us to this like local. It was like um, a kind of a local food showcase in the back of the Eden Prairie Costco store. And we mocked up like a 2-pound bag of our blueberry chia, our number one selling muesli at the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, like I remember they had built like a office out of like toilet paper rolls of all things. Like this must have been like pre-COVID,
Yeah.
because they had a lot of excess toilet paper and things. They built this like back room in a Costco, and we pitched essentially this product line. And what I love about it was like the efficiency of their model is um, and the regionality of their model. Like that, we were meeting with like the Midwest buying team. So
Yeah.
when you think about like opportunities to work in or change the food system, shift the food system into like sort of a regional play, or like a sourcing and shipping direct instead of going through distributors, and shipping in bigger bags instead of small bags. Like that, I've always loved the Costco model. They're also just like a great partner to work with. They pay really fast. They they're I think you hear in the industry a lot of negative things about Costco. We have, in our 6 years, 7 years of working with them, nothing but great things to say about
Nice.
that retailer. They've really helped us bridge to profitability and kind of all the things. They have been a game changer for us. Um, so club has been key for those reasons. We we had a D2C moment, like a lot of brands, like kind of post coming out of COVID. Um, we pushed hard and grew really rapidly during that kind of COVID pandemic supply chain era
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
2020 to 2023. Um, and it was for us a really great way to get our product into particularly like healthy food influencers' hands, and then they can come right to your website and buy it. Like that was like I consider that time period like really important from a brand awareness and marketing standpoint, and also felt like very lucky that we could do that. Like of
Yeah.
all the, we were a pantry staple, which like benefited from that time period, as opposed to food service or some of the others that were negatively impacted. So we felt the COVID bump for sure. But like now that we're kind of back to normal, I guess that changes by the day now. But now that we're sort of back into this normal state, like it's
Yeah.
not a super high margin area of our business. It's more like just that high touch area of the business where you want to come as like a brand loyalist and get
Yeah.
that extra love and attention, which we really lean into. And that's a lot of like the education that we do, if we do it around regenerative or around upcycling initiatives, or anything B Corp related. like we're sending those messages in that high touch way through our online shop. So it's a really great marketing and education piece that we'll always have. It's just not, we're not like putting the pedal to the metal on the D2C business because it's
I'm
not.
assuming the shipping costs with the weight of your products is a challenge for that channel.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we don't have a lot of margin built in to begin with. I mean, we're a food company, right? So we
Right,
have to
right.
be, super tight on everything across the board to stay competitive, particularly in the cereal aisle where,
Yeah.
there's a certain expectation around, what a customer will be willing to pay. And that's changing and shifting in our favor. Um, you know, thanks to a handful of emerging brands who have kind of come into that space, and that's what it's going to take to, I think, change that perception of, what is like the true cost of food. So we have, back to your channel strategy question. Um, we are we're cautiously entering MULO or conventional.
Yeah.
We just launched into Target and Kroger kind of right around the same time.
Wow.
Um,
Nice.
and I say that with caution only because we've been there before and just didn't have the right product assortment and velocities to support it at the time. So it can be a,
What
a pain.
SKUs this time around, Brady?
This time around, they started with our top selling sunflower and oat cereal, which is the right place to be for them and for us,
Yeah.
because they're the most familiar in the marketplace. Even though they're relatively the newest, they've definitely been the fastest growing. And then yeah, more to come is
Nice.
and better shelf space this summer from what I understand. Because right now we're like way on the top shelf. It's like
Yeah.
hard for me to even reach, let alone like, a kid.
The suburban mother. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I'd say, yeah, and then, and then looking forward even farther out, like how do we move beyond the cereal aisle is something we think about a lot into different formats. Cause what we found is that it's more than just a breakfast time
Yeah.
opportunity for people. Like even our family, we're eating it, I'd say, yes, in the morning, but also at night, throwing it into, snack bags for after school activities or sports activities, things like that. So, and we're hearing that from a lot of our consumers. So
Yeah.
how do we show up in a way that allows, that convenience factor, kind of more snack opportunities is another thing we're thinking about as we look ahead to this year and next. We're trying to shift, a larger um, scale in the right direction as opposed to kind of going after, that tip of the spear audience. So we want the flexibility of conventional regen. It's worked really well for us. We do use some organic ingredients where it makes sense to. We're all for it. And um, I think there are consumers that are looking for that. But we're just, for all the reasons I mentioned, we're just kind of trying to shift the industry in the food system towards better practices, different practices, better practices. You know, whether that whether that's organic or not is not the most important thing for us.
Well, you were kind of just going there, Brady, but one question I always like to ask is like, what's coming in the future? You guys are doing a lot. There's a lot going on with sourcing, supply chain building, new product development, channel mix. We've talked about all of that.
Mhm.
Um, how do you all think about future growth and what's coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, there's a lot in the pipeline from an innovation standpoint. We intentionally kind of after the Krispies and we launched a couple new granolas. We had to hit pause on the innovation side just because we were all as a team here feeling like we're drinking from the fire hose with all the growth that we're seeing, which is great. But like
Yeah.
now we need to operationally get to a point where we feel stable enough to start innovating again. So that's not to say we won't mix up the flavors or bring seasonal things or different formats of existing products that,
Mm,
like I mentioned, kind of can be, you know, outside of that breakfast moment,
yeah.
and into more of like a snacking format. That's still, top of mind for us. Um, and then the other exciting thing, I know I've mentioned, early on in our conversation that like the consumer's not ready. The consumer doesn't, you know, isn't um, isn't listening or not necessarily like engaged in the regenerative conversation. Um, but we do still want to have that conversation. We've historically not really been great at it, to be honest. Like what we have going for us is we've been talking about this loosely, like our farmer connections and
Yeah.
sharing those stories. I don't think it would come as a surprise if we started talking about, our supply, our farmer partners, or shining the spotlight on them,
Mhm.
because you know, if you've been with us or following the Seven Sundays journey, you've heard us talk about these things in the past. I think we have the opportunity to talk more about some of the stuff that we're doing. So we are um, we are hoping to kind of uh, create a rallying cry, almost, you know, bringing the consumer into the things that we're talking about and doing within our supply chain.
Mhm.
And so, if you're open to me, kind of testing a little bit here
Please,
live with how we're
please.
thinking about this consumer education
Yeah.
and bringing the consumer journey along, because to me, like, this is a key unlock, like the infrastructure piece, some of these other challenges that, and some of your other guests on the podcast have said the same thing, and ultimately the consumer is going to drive this movement. If it is going to have legs over the long term, it's got
Mhm.
to come, there's got to be more and more pull from the consumer side. So we can't stop trying to meet them
Yeah.
where they're at. We just, I think, need to say it. We need to say things in a more engaging way. So we,
It's just
you
that
know,
simple
and
sometimes.
meet people where they're at. And
Mhm.
again, like we historically haven't been great at this, but we're shifting the conversation to this year we're going further afield. And afield essentially for us means like off the beaten path. Like
Mm.
we are um, we are going to try our best to bring the consumer out as if they were kind of taking this journey with us, getting out with our farming partners who are doing really awesome things this growing season, um, and kind of let them see what's happening. Share really engaging stories about like the oat mafia, for instance. Like,
Mhm.
why is there this pent up demand for like to grow oats in the Midwest? Who are these people? And kind of starting to share some of those stories.
Mhm.
Afield is also an acronym for always farm, innovate, educate, and lead differently. So that's kind of
Mm.
like our internal language for our mission, but our
Yeah.
external kind of rallying cry
Yeah.
to the consumer as we sort of bring them in is going to be like, let's go, come afield with us, like come
Mhm.
off the beaten path. And there's these really great examples that we already have that we're just going to open. We're going to open the door and let you in and
Mhm.
share those stories in where they live and how, exactly, how we reach the consumer. Up in the air. That's sort of where our marketing team is kind of trying to
Yeah.
figure out how best to leverage this content and get it
Mhm.
out into the world. But I think the first step is getting the content right, like really
Yeah.
meeting consumers where they're at. Don't be too heavy. Obviously, like it's tricky around like everything seems to be political and
Mhm.
eh, and you know polarizing it to some extent. But um, there's also these really great stories within our supply chain and these events that are happening around field days and
Yeah.
uh, like there's music festivals and other places that are like super engaging and good opportunities to sort of meet people in a really exciting way to where we can kind of like just get them excited about the movement, about like give them hope, that there's, because I feel like there's all this gloom and doom around, climate change, or like
Yeah.
the path that we're currently on for people health, and people are sick, and it's not getting any better, and
Right.
try to send the message in like a really hopeful way. um One example of that, for me, and sort of this journey, Kiss the Ground really gave me a
Yeah.
lot of hope.
Yeah.
Um and I think, as a brand, to the extent consumers are willing to listen and join that journey with us, we want to, pass along that same message and hope that we are there. The cereal aisle is changing, and the food system is changing for the better. And um, here's some really cool stuff that's happening at the farm level, and bring people along that journey with us.
Yeah, I love that because it's about narrative and transparency and intimacy. And Allie from Harmless Harvest, I think, really nailed this on her episode where she talked about, for them, they look at Regen or even their sustainability narrative as about loyalty and retention. It's not really about driving purchase. And I think for
Yep.
the vast majority of brands, that is the case. And so if you're thinking about it from a hardcore CPG marketing perspective, like that strategy that you just articulated lends itself really well to being about loyalty and retention, more so than driving purchase. And so it's like, how do we turn a fan into a super fan? And how do we, agnostic of certification, agnostic of claims, like
Yep.
increase the consciousness and the connection to the food source, which ultimately will lead us to the right path at the end of the day. It doesn't really matter what we call it at that point if we accomplish that first, in
Yeah,
my opinion.
totally. And there's certain threads that that I think are within that food system conversation, and nutrient density is a big one as well that we're digging into, no pun intended. Um, but there's certain threads that I think will resonate with any person that eats food, right? You don't have to eliminate um, anyone in this conversation, or polarize anyone with this conversation, because ultimately they care about, um, you know, what they're feeding their family, and they want to do the best they can for, their health and their kids' health. And uh, anyways, that I
Yeah,
think those are the threads we're looking to pull.
yeah, I love that. Um, Man, this has been a great conversation. I want to give a quick shout out to Emily Lafferty, who we've alluded to multiple times. Emily is a dear friend of mine in this industry. She's an amazing person. She does great work, and I just deeply appreciate her. And she's obviously been a friend of mine for a while, but she's also the one that connected us because she also works at Seven Sundays. So shout out Emily. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks,
Um,
Emily.
and Brady, we'll take it home with our final question that we asked everybody, which is, how do we get Regen brands to have 50% market share by 2050? How do you think we do that?
Yeah, I think it's a collection of a lot of different things, that we've already touched on, um, and then you know working together and collaborating as, all of us in the industry here, that you're doing a great job of bringing to the table, um, of moving things in the right direction. I think it's, to kind of recap, it's infrastructure, and kind of, building different supply chains, whether it's regenerative or upcycled, around processors.
Mhm.
Um, Even at the farm level, it's a similar hub and spoke model, that we've talked quite a bit about here, like where you have that fringe farmer who's doing things differently, bringing in their neighbors because they're seeing the success that they're having, um, or just they're interested in doing things differently, and they're just a really great resource. Tom Cotter is an awesome example of that, one of our sunflower growers.
Mhm.
He's bringing in several of his neighbors this year as we grow acres with him.
Nice.
Um, and and then it's the consumer awareness piece, that we just touched on. A different type of storytelling that's more around, you know, shining the spotlight on these fringe farmers, and why the practices that they're doing, are worth it, and because it's hard, and that, they're stepping outside the traditional path and doing
Mhm.
things differently. why that matters all the way through the consumer level in terms of soil health and nutrient density, and then ultimately the food that we're bringing into the cereal aisle. So it's kind of connecting all those dots. It's a complex story. I wish there was just sort of one thing, but here we are, like 13 years into our journey and our mission, and we're still kind of pulling all those pieces together. But the exciting thing for us, and that I would share on to brands who are on the same path, is that if you do stick with it and fight through some of the challenges of doing things differently and working with partners in your supply chain that are doing things differently, and then finding the right product assortment and mix and retailer partners who are accepting of that, that it can work. There is change being made, and that's what keeps me going. Is that there's this growth happening. So now I can kind of see a path towards 2,000 acres and 4,000 acres, and then joining a consortium of brands that are all in this together doing the same thing. And then you can actually see the change in the landscape, and hopefully 5-10 years from now, driving down the I-35 south to Austin, I'm not looking at sea of corn,
Right.
and there's an oat field, and there's buckwheat growing, and there's sorghum fields. Like, that's kind of the vision for the future for us, and where we're taking this mission.
I look forward to seeing that future with you as well, brother. That's gonna be fun.
Yep.
Hit me with the acronym Afield one more time. I feel like that encapsulates everything well, and I didn't catch it the first time.
Always farm, innovate, educate, and lead differently.
Love it. Hell yeah. Good encapsulation. If anybody wants to learn more about Seven Sundays, you can visit their website, 7sundays.com. We'll obviously have it in the show notes with some of the other stuff that Brady and I mentioned as well. But appreciate you being here, man. This was great. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
For transcripts, show notes, and more information on this episode, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to future episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, the Regen Brands Weekly, and follow our Regen Brands LinkedIn page to stay in the know on all the latest news, insights, and perspectives from the world of regenerative CPG. Thanks so much for tuning into the Regen Brands podcast. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, your talent, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.